Yes, students, I have come with a new module, right of stoppage in transit. This is part 3. So this is a lengthy topic. I have divided it into 3 and this is the last part of that. That is right of stoppage in transit, module 3. Now, method of acquiring the right of stoppage in transit. See, we know that seller has parted with the possession of the goods. Now it has come to a mediate or middleman, that is the carrier or the transport company. Now how the seller will regain the possession of goods. So what are the methods for that? First is by taking actual possession of the goods. Seller can take actual possession of the goods. Second is by giving notice of his claim to the carrier or the bailee in whose possession the goods are. See, the transport company or they will be moving the goods from one place to another. So he can give a notice to the transport company. So that is the second method. Third is such a notice may be given either when you are giving a notice to the person in actual possession of goods or to his principal, either the agent or the actual owner. So then only they can take the necessary action. When the notice is given to the principal, notice must be given well in advance. See, if you are informing the transport company, the idea is before the goods will reach the buyer's godown or the buyer's destination, seller has to regain possession of the goods. So here the notice has to be given to the principal well in advance. What is the need for that? To enable the principal to communicate with his agent in time so as to prevent delivery to the buyer. The principal has to inform the driver, the truck driver, to stop the truck because seller has got a claim. So then only it will be effective. Now, expenses of redelivery. See, if seller is regaining possession of goods, certain expenses he has to bear. Maybe the transport company will charge something, insurance will be there, security will be there. So the godown charges he may charge, all that. But we have to remember expenses of redelivery to be borne by the seller. He cannot charge it to the buyer. Now, liability of carrier, that is also important because they are the middlemen in place. So the carrier is liable to both the seller and the buyer. So both the seller and the buyer, first point is liable to the seller, second is liable to the buyer. So first we will see what is the carrier's liability to the seller. So if the carrier after instructions from the seller, see that is seller is trying to regain possession of goods. So seller has given instructions to the carrier, either the driver of the truck or the principal, with proper notice and instruction to stop the delivery of goods in transit. He is giving clear instruction not to move the goods further because I want to get my payment or any other reason. So if goods are delivered to the buyer or refuse to deliver them to the seller, see, carrier can do two things. Ignoring the seller's instruction, he can deliver the goods to the buyer, or he will just ignore the instructions of the seller. The carrier is responsible for conversion. What is the meaning of conversion? That is wrongful appropriation of goods of another. He has to bear the liability because he has not followed the instruction of the seller. So this is the liability of the carrier for the seller. Second, we have to see the liability to the buyer. Imagine the dispute is ended between buyer and seller. Only when there is a dispute between buyer and seller, seller is trying to regain possession of goods. Imagine the dispute is ended between seller and buyer. So this is the liability of the buyer towards the carrier, but the carrier wrongfully returns the goods to the seller. Now when the dispute is ended between seller and buyer, the carrier has to deliver the goods to the buyer. But imagine the carrier is giving the goods, delivery of the goods to the seller itself. So the carrier is liable for conversion. So conversion meaning he is liable for wrongful delivery to the wrong person. Now we are going to take another example, right of lien versus right of stoppage in transit. So this distinction, 4 points are there. This is very important because these are the rights. Right of lien we have learned in detail and right of stoppage in transit. What is the difference? See, seller's lien, in the case of right of lien, applies when the buyer is in default. That is whether the buyer is solvent or insolvent. Lien you mean that he is retaining the possession of goods, whereas right of stoppage in transit is regaining. Once he has parted to a middleman, he is trying to recollect the possession of the goods. So lien is possible when the buyer is in default. He has not made the payment. He has not fulfilled the terms and conditions. Whether buyer is solvent or insolvent, the seller can use this. Whereas right of stoppage in transit can be applied only when the buyer is insolvent. Next is when the right can be exercised. Right of lien can be exercised when the seller has actual possession of goods. See, seller is keeping the goods. He has not parted with the goods. Then only right of lien can be possible. Whereas right of stoppage in transit, when the seller has parted with the goods and goods are with a carrier. He lost possession of the goods. Now the goods are with a middleman or a carrier or a transport company. Then he can use right of stoppage in transit. The idea is to regain possession of goods. Now the third point is when the lien comes to an end. Right of lien, you have to remember, when the seller hands over goods to the carrier to deliver it to the buyer. That meaning he lost possession of goods. Next is right of stoppage in transit when the buyer has acquired possession of goods. If the buyer got the possession of the goods, right of stoppage in transit will not work because buyer already got the possession of goods. Last point is right of lien. Right of lien, when you are exercising this right, this is the most important point. Right of lien is to retain the possession of goods, retain the possession, continue to keep with the seller itself. See, if you bought a mobile phone, you made only part payment. The seller will keep it till you make the full payment. Seller has got the possession of the goods. Whereas right of stoppage in transit, to regain or resume possession of goods. Seller has given the item to a transport company to deliver it to the buyer. So he is trying to regain or resume possession of goods. So this is what I wanted to explain in this module. Happy learning. Thank you.